Hi everyone. Thank you for joining our roundtable titled Mapping and Beyond in Disrupting Dominant Spatial Narratives. Initially, the idea for this roundtable was to discuss critical mapping as more than a mere tool for representing quote-unquote reality. Thus, the title begins with mapping, which, like many others, I view as a political tool that influences socio-spatial decisions and can juxtapose disparate knowledge and claims over architectural and urban space. Traditionally, maps convey information through specific data, measurements, and symbols, often reflecting dominant narratives and colonial influences. However, alternative and more inclusive mapping practices also incorporate elements and intuitive and personal understandings derived from qualitative research and work, such as interviews and psychogeographic explorations. And this approach underscores the need for maps to address qualities such as materiality, bodily experience, and the transparency of data collection and dissemination. So mapping can transcend visual representation and illuminate marginalized voices and experiences. So in brainstorming who to invite for this roundtable, I learned more about the work of the speakers we have with us today: Adam, Lorenzo representing Lemonade, Sarah, and Nadia, who are utilizing additional tools and methods beyond just mapping. And today we'll hear about their projects and their methods and tools that they use to reveal spatial inequality, the destruction of communities and places, state violence and human rights violation. We will discuss how public space can be more progressive for marginalized bodies and how to initiate unconventional acts of placemaking. First of all, thank you for accepting my invitation to come to this roundtable, and thank you to the Architectural Association and the AHRA PhD Student Symposium for organizing this, and especially to Mariana Capraro, who helped to put this roundtable together. So I will start with brief introductions of the speakers, then I'll introduce myself, and then we'll listen to their 10 minutes presentation, and we'll follow up with a discussion. So please come to the table if you want to join and actively participate in the discussion afterwards. So I'll start with Adam Paul Susaneck, who is an architect researching how transportation and housing policy has been used as an instrument of physical division within urban areas. His ongoing project, Segregation by Design, aims to catalog the destruction caused by mid-century urban renewal and highway projects. Adam has written for the New York Times, the Architects newspaper, and others, and he's pursuing a PhD in urban planning at the Delft Institute of Technology in the Netherlands, and he earned his Master of Architecture from Columbia University. He's a project manager at AECOM, working on transportation projects both in the Benelux and in the Northeast US. Then Lemonade is a duo that combines spatial and relational practices based in London and Italy. Sabrina Morreale and Lorenzo Perri explore the dynamics of public space operating between architecture and performative arts, using them as tools to detect, celebrate, and trigger the spontaneous theater of everyday life. Fellows of Lina European Architecture Platform, they collaborate with multiple organizations, festivals, and cultural institutions, among others, Metropoli, CAF Copenhagen, DPR, Barcelona, Three Rivers, Bexley, and La Biennale di Venezia. Both graduated from the Architectural Association. They taught across Europe, Vienna, Latin America, and Bangkok. Currently, Sabrina is teaching in the foundation course here at the AA, and together they lead the Architectural Design Studio 7 at the Royal College of Art in London. Nadia Mendez is an architect from the Universidad de los Andes with a master's in urban design from the Bartlett, currently pursuing a PhD at the AA. Her research focuses on the intersection between formal and informal assistance space in forced migration processes. Before joining the AA, Nadia has worked for over a decade in a wide range of fields such as architecture, urban design, and research, in practice such as Arab and forensic architecture. She's one of the co-founders of Plano Negativo, the forensic architecture laboratory in Colombia. And last but not least, Sarah Ackland is a practicing architect at MAF Architecture Art and a PhD researcher at Newcastle University. Her research explores women in space through embodied, feminist, and autoethnographic practices, using her body as a device to explore spaces, the city, and degrees of access and care. During her PhD, she founded Taking Space, a curated research platform She's due to complete her PhD in 2024. And in architectural practice is interested in the politics of marginalized bodies in public space, celebrating and preserving the existing and uncovering local narrative. In 2019, Sarah received the RIBA Research Fund and subsequently produced the podcast series 29% Equal, which shares stories between women in architecture to disrupt the archive. And finally, I'm Areti Kotsoni. I'm a licensed architect from Crete, Greece. I recently completed my master in design studies at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And in parallel, I served as an adjunct professor at Wentworth Institute of Technology, teaching Master of Architecture students. My research broadly and teaching focus on conflict urbanism, critical cartography, and migration. And I will be starting my PhD studies in urban studies and planning at MIT this fall. So the roundtable will last 90 minutes. We'll start with 10 minutes presentations, and then we'll have a 30 minutes discussion on tools and methods, who include but are not limited to mapping and offer criticality and agency in design thinking, can challenge prevailing spatial narratives, and can bring attention to marginalized communities to advocate for social justice. So again, feel free to come join the table. We have some index cards for later to write down your questions and engage in different forms. So we can start with Adam.
Cool. Thanks. I guess I could have done that. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and for inviting me. Thank you, AA, for having me. Thanks for being here. Sorry, I'm nervous, so I'm just starting with thank yous to everybody. But my name is Adam Paul Susaneck. I'm the founder of the project Segregation by Design, which uses historic aerial photography, historic city records, and GIS data to document the destruction of communities of color in the United States, primarily due to urban renewal and including highway construction as part of urban renewal. This project, as already mentioned, is part of my ongoing PhD at TU Delft, and informs my professional work at AECOM in New York City, where we've been working with clients, including the New York State Department of Transportation and the Federal Department of Transportation, to try to reconnect some of the communities divided by infrastructure choices of the past. There's some money for retrofitting highway facilities from the Biden administration. Not much, but there's some. So today, I'm going to very briefly discuss the history of highway construction in the US and some methods I use to analyze its impact. So I'm just gonna jump over to a video real quick, which I should have had queued up. So I was playing some of these earlier, but I'll just let this play. This is the BQE in Brooklyn. So again, starting with a bit of history. So after World War II, American cities across the country leveraged federal funding for infrastructure construction to fund urban highways. Note, I'll be using the term expressway, freeway, and highway sort of interchangeably during this presentation. But what I mean is limited access highway roads like the Westway here in London. So the way in which American cities planned and built their highway networks was heavily influenced by the designer of this particular highway. And this is, again, the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway in New York City. That designer was New York City's quote, master builder, Robert Moses, who some of you might be familiar with. Moses, again, a very highly influential American city planner. He argued, this is a direct quote, that freeways must go right through cities and not around them. And he was one of the first to really couple, freeway construction with large-scale, quote, slum clearance and blight elimination. So what that meant was that he steered highways through neighborhoods with what were deemed at the time to be, quote, undesirable populations. So that's primarily immigrant and non-white communities. This goes on for a while, but jumping back to the presentation. This is actually one of those highways that I'm working on in my professional career to try to address the history of. Okay, so again, Robert Moses planned and built the BQE and other highways like it in New York City, coupled it with, quote, slum clearance and urban renewal. This is Boston, planners in other cities followed suit, directly influenced by Moses. Also leveraging federal funding for urban renewal and highway construction, which sought to clear, again, blighted neighborhoods and slums. These neighborhoods, blighted neighborhoods and slums, as the government defined it. And these neighborhoods were often destroyed and replaced with, if not highways themselves, with commercial facilities designed to, sorry, I've totally lost my place. I'm gonna get my place here. They destroyed these neighborhoods and replaced them with commercial facilities designed to retain and attract businesses. So again, in this example in Boston, the primarily Black and Jewish neighborhood of, where's my mouse? Of the West End, which you can see here. So these pictures correspond to here. So this neighborhood is this. So the Black and Jewish neighborhood of the West End was completely leveled and replaced, again, with a commercial facility, primarily parking for a hospital expansion, and new government facilities, a new Department of Motor Vehicles building. And fun fact about this neighborhood, this is actually where Leonard Nimoy from Spock is from, or from Star Trek. There's some great interviews with him talking about what it was actually like growing up in this neighborhood. And he said, at first there was a lot of tension between the Black and Jewish community, and then he said until they started marrying each other. And it's a similar story in these melting pot neighborhoods that we talk about in America, but actually destroyed a lot of. So again, these urban renewal and slum clearance projects, the way they defined a slum was based on who was living there, not necessarily the actual architectural reality of the neighborhood. And what constituted a slum, again, was based on race, as officially codified before World War II in redlining maps, such as this one. So to put it very simply, what redlining was a federal policy in which, this is Philadelphia and Brooklyn, in which the federal government went city by city, grading each neighborhood in every city for investment worthiness based on race. Not based on, again, the architectural composition or the actual geography, but on the composition of the people who lived there. And again, these were created for nearly every single medium and large city in the United States. So these really informed what the neighborhoods were that were going to be cleared. This was in the 30s, and then slum clearance comes along about 15 years later. And there's a lot of correlation, again, between these redlining maps and what actually gets destroyed. So now, that's just a very brief history. Again, during the Depression, they grade different neighborhoods for investment worthiness. That sort of creates a feedback loop in which these neighborhoods actually decay. Sorry, I'm going off script a little bit. And then in an effort to combat that decay and remove undesirable populations, they use federal money to destroy these facilities and replace them with commercial facilities designed to attract and retain businesses. So now a bit about methodology. I'm okay on time. Yeah.
At least 7 minutes.
I have 7 minutes. Oh, great. Okay, I'm doing okay.
You're good.
I'll slow down a little bit. Okay, sorry. Very happy to be at the AA. Everyone at Columbia is going to be very impressed. It's like, oh my gosh. No, I'm serious. I'm serious. Okay, so now talking a bit about my methods, how I do this. And I want to look at a particular case to discuss this. So I'm going to start with an example in Los Angeles, the example of Sugar Hill, which was one of the wealthiest Black neighborhoods in America. It's actually recently been on a TV show, I guess, Lessons in Chemistry. I haven't seen it, but yeah, they discussed that. But so Sugar Hill was notable as one of the wealthiest Black neighborhoods on the West Coast. It was home to several prominent Black entertainers and actors. Hattie McDaniel was actually the first Black woman to win an Oscar. She lived there. But despite this, it's this area right here. I should have labeled that. This is a redlining map of Los Angeles. This is downtown Santa Monica, the ocean over here. But so here, right in close to downtown, so it's a good location too. Again, the redlining had nothing to do with the actual physical built environment. And it was really well connected to downtown using the streetcar network that's gone. But again, starting with the example of Sugar Hill. So, which is right here. So when taking a look at a particular case, I often like to start with contemporaneous aerial photography. So aerial photography from the time before the actual neighborhood was destroyed, to the extent that it's available. The historic aerial photography, which you see this one from 1945. It's taken from airplanes. It's not taken from satellites like in Google Maps. It's generally a part of a military survey or a government survey. But I start with these historic aerials because they reveal the neighborhood as they actually were, rather than as it's described on these redlining maps and other contemporaneous maps, which often just won't even render an area they don't like. That's especially true in, this is an aside, but this is especially true. I'm from Miami, Florida, and all the planning documents for the freeway network. The freeway there, basically they dropped it right on top of the heart of the Black community, Overtown. But when in the planning documents, they don't even show the neighborhood. They act as if it's in the middle of nowhere. So again, I like to use these historic aerials because they really show the neighborhood physically. And you can see in this example, I've added color in post, which is a part of the process. It really helps modern audiences interpret the image because we're used to looking at Google Maps, satellite views. And otherwise, these original photos, before I add color, they really just look like gray blobs, so it can be hard to see. And then I'll compare that to today, so you can really see the level of destruction. And this is just from Google Maps. And for the historic aerials, generally get those from public libraries. These are from UCSB, UC Santa Barbara. So again, when comparing that, I really like to start this because it's very physical. So then what I can do after that is so this is a historic cadastral map. So you see this pattern, it's not this circled area, it's actually this right here. But if folks can see that. So once I can identify an area, then I can use historic cadastral maps to find out more details about the buildings that were demolished. And in particular, I rely on these, which are fire insurance maps, the Sanborn fire insurance maps that are available from the US Library of Congress. These were made for every single city, large and small. They're really cool if you see them in person. And they were updated periodically until about 1950, which is the eve of the highway building era. So they really capture the built environment of American cities just before we destroyed a lot of them. And they would mail out these updates. You can see like where they pasted in stuff on top, regardless. And then the colors corresponds to the material because it's a fire insurance map designed to sell fire insurance. So yellow is wood, red is brick. Okay, so once I have that information, I can then, it's sometimes then possible to actually find information about the individual buildings and the houses. So I can go in, where are we at? I scrolled down too far. So then I can go in, this I found from UCLA. But so I can, again, find the actual information when it's available, compare and see the effect. And then what's really cool, I'm just sort of going step by step here. What's really cool is I can, 2 minutes? Cool, all right, I'll go fast. What's really cool is then I can use these directories to find out who actually lived there. So I can then, which is really, it's great when that happens. So in this case, it was Dr. Ruth Temple, the first Black woman doctor in California. Sugar Hill was a very wealthy, notable neighborhood. Next to her was Dr. Perri Beale. I got this from the Beale family, actually. And he was one of the first Black doctors in Houston, Texas. He moved to LA. Next to that, and you can see this is a slum. Like what? It's racial, or it's racist. But so next to that was Miss Cora Berry, who was a high school teacher. Okay, so the destruction of Sugar Hill was not unique. This happened in cities around the country. So I made this chart as part of my one of my New York Times articles, which I recommend. I have a good article that, well, I shouldn't say my own article is good, but I have an article called Mr. Biden Tear Down This Highway. That wasn't my idea for that. I just wanted to call it segregation by design. But it's a good summary of the history that I sort of blew through at the top. But so what this is showing is that, again, Sugar Hill is not a unique case. I mean, it's unique in that how wealthy it was, and Hattie McDaniel, et cetera. But so what this is showing is that urban renewal and highway construction always disproportionately affects the city's non-white population. So here, for instance, in Philly, in 1950, so looking at the time that these projects were happening, so in 1950, only about 20% of Philly's population was non-white, but about 70% of those displaced were non-white. In Philly, that's mostly black. I'm saying non-white because it doesn't, unfortunately, the old census data doesn't get that granular. They have black, but then with like Hispanic, they just consider them white, and there's a lot of different categories that changes. But otherwise, New York would actually be way more disproportionate because they counted Puerto Ricans as white, but they were a significant amount of the people displaced. Okay, again, this happened in nearly every single city. I think I'm almost, okay, really quickly. So these displacements and demolitions took place in the past, but for the communities that remain divided by these, this is the Bronx, considerable public health impacts exist, or persist rather. Again, this is the Bronx, so seen here, what I've done is overlaid a noise map from the US DOT onto a historic aerial, and what this is, this noise map maps basically directly onto the Bronx highway network, and purple here is actually as loud as a jackhammer. So for the people that live in this shed, the noise shed here, the tens of thousands of people, it's the Bronx. There's a lot of public health impacts that come with that. And then, you know, one of the main ones, not from the noise, but from the pollution, is asthma. And this is a causal relationship. It's the particulate matter from the tires, brakes, and not just the exhaust. Okay, I'll end there. So again, these are all the cities the project intends to cover. These are all the cities that received federal money for highway construction and urban renewal. Check out my Instagram. No, I'm serious. It's
great. Do run it down.
Thank you. I post a lot of these. You know, there's a reason these are portrait oriented. But these are some of the projects. These are some of the cities I've covered so far. I'm breaking New York down into 5 because it's New York. I'll end there. I had really just wanted to talk briefly about, for my PhD, and then using those cadastral maps, the before and after, I can also look at the loss in housing density in America, which is a big deal, and an origin of the housing crisis. Now I'm done. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm very happy to be here today. I'm gonna speak on behalf of both me and Sabrina Morreale that unfortunately couldn't be here, so I'm gonna do my best to speak for her as well. Me and her, we are a duo called Lemonot that, as Areti anticipated, we work in between architecture, relational, and performative arts, meant as tool to map and enable the spontaneous theater of the realities that surround us. We work a lot between geometrical abstraction and figurative inputs, trying to build small convivial architecture that are helping us to measure the distance between unmarked quotidian practices and the exceptional acts of improvisation. We use the uncanny, the disproportionate as principles against the norm, trying to challenge the way things are used and the way spaces are experienced. We're working a lot with performativity, and we're really trying to bridge what we think again, is the distance between bodies, spaces, objects, and architecture. Trying to really understand how pieces of architecture can become animalistic, anthropomorphic entities that are really transforming what we think it is the usual and the way we experience the spaces. We both graduated in here at the Architectural Association, and Sabrina still teaches in here in the foundation course. And together, we lead a studio at the Royal College of Art, exploring some of the things that I briefly introduced so far, and exploring what it means to work and design convivially, what it means to use conviviality as a subtle form of resistance and spatial activism, what it means to really be active in public space, what it means to use mapping, research as something very productive for design endeavors, and as something that helps us connecting with communities and gaining trust and transform together the spaces of our cities. We are really interested in working especially in contexts of diversity and like trying to understand how spatial scenarios could like build heterogeneity, like trying to bridge difference while rejecting sameness. Today I'm going to present very briefly a couple of projects that we did as designers for cultural events such as the Bangkok Design Week and the Venice Biennale. I'm going to start with this project that we did in 2019 where they commissioned us like an exhibition. So it wasn't meant to be an act of mapping. And like they commissioned us an exhibition for the Design Week that every year happens within the neighborhood of Talan Noi, which is a very peculiar neighborhood in the city of Bangkok, completely disconnected from the Design Week itself. So we were trying to understand how, through our work, our piece, we could reconnect the two. What is very interesting about this neighborhood is the fact that the urban fabric is characterized by a series of accumulation of metallic fragments that are really pervading the whole urban fabric and that are basically set of functioning second-hand car parts coming from all over the world. What we wanted to somehow track back is like how they really pervade the urban fabric, how they construct like its image, how they construct its history, and how like they construct like the way people experience it. So we decided to build like as our piece a sort of an alternative map of the neighborhood, which is a booklet constructed through a series of mechanical and human portraits with a series of locations for visitors to really experience this neighborhood that otherwise would be disconnected from the event that they would like come to see. Maybe later in the conversation we can even go like through the whole book if there's time. Otherwise, right now like it would have been like too long. But like for us, like it was interesting to really understand again how like this accumulation of pieces that like might have looked chaotic, random, they were really built timeline of like the neighborhoods itself. And it was like interesting for us to understand how like we could, through the piece that we were exhibiting, celebrate the utilitarian commercial practices that generated spontaneously this iconography. So what we decided to do, it was like to stage, together with the seller, an auction within an exhibition venue. We were asking them like to borrow like a series of pieces and like to construct together an aesthetic, a synthetic carpet that of course like wasn't like nearly fascinating as the original mountains, but that like would have helped like to showcase in a different context these pieces. And what was interesting for us is that like at first, like they were reluctant. They really didn't like want to collaborate. They really didn't understand what we wanted to do. But like by the end of the exhibition, like this is a small video from the auction itself, what was nice is that they started inviting friends. They started understanding that like this could have been like a different stage set for them to keep performing these daily, everyday practices. So in that sense, like by starting from really like the reality that surrounds us and by understanding how through our skills, our, I don't know, like different point of views, but like also like through our like possible collaborations with like non-designers, with like residents, we could come up with the participatory, let's say, active and convivial piece of architecture. Just like a few pictures from the auction and like from really like somehow the culmination of that act of mapping and like the set of mechanical and human portraits that I showed you at the beginning. How am I doing with time? Okay. This idea of like using like these cultural events like as platforms to construct artistic microeconomies is something that like stayed with us like for a bit. And like this idea of like what does it mean, like again like reflecting on what it is like a performative exhibition, on what it is like an artwork that really deals like with the city and with the spaces that like host it, and that can be somehow doing something for it. Last year, we were commissioned by the Venice Biennale a very complicated project because it was supposed to be, well, one piece, one sculpture within the Italian pavilion, but it was supposed to be anticipated by a research endeavor like on site in Sardinia, like in Italy. And like somehow, like how do you really construct a process that was lasting for a series of months that culminates with with a sculpture, with something which is meant to be just contemplative, but that, it's connected to certain things that are really happening on site. And you'll see, I'll explain you in a bit, that again, this idea of an auction comes back, but I want you first to see a short film that we staged before the beginning of the Biennale in an abandoned church in Sardinia. I'm gonna just show a glimpse of it, if it starts. Yes, it does. Maybe later or next time. So what you saw, as I perhaps wrongly, I shouldn't have anticipated it, but what you saw, it's a sort of surreal fictional reenactment of an auction. That Fulvio, the main actor, where Fulvio performs simultaneously a caring guardian, and the surreal auctioneer, showcasing certain pieces that then were exhibited within the Italian pavilion. In here you see a bit of the space, a series of 9 installations. It was done together, it was a collaborative project done together by Sabrina, me, Roberto, who's an expert in food systems working in Copenhagen from Sardinia, and then the main curator of the pavilion, Fosbury Architecture from Milan. We had to deal with food transition in the Cabras Pond in Sardinia, and we were trying to deal with the supply chain of Bottarga, somehow trying to showcase that food transition perhaps has little to do with food and has a lot to do with the economic diversification and the dignification of alternative resources. Within such an amazing area that has amazing natural resources and a set of very interesting architectural heritage and economical opportunities. We have been doing design-led research with the RCA students for a bit, and we were trying to map all the different landscapes and all the different practices that characterize the area. Something very interesting is that the Cabras Pond until the 1982 was the last feudal area in Italy, so it was private property, and this resulted into the construction of mini cities along its shores. They had the municipal palace and had churches, which are right now are abandoned because they are listed, so they can no longer be productive, but then nothing happened in them. So somehow what we wanted to highlight with our piece is this idea of redignifying certain pieces of architecture that could become economical alternative to otherwise a supply chain that led to an incessant demand that led to really a series of problems. How do we, in a way, and we were looking for a material that could symbolize these intersections between landscape, human practices, food systems, and architecture. As some of you might know, the Bottarga, the fermented Muller roux, is actually produced by being put under salt. And the salt is such an important symbolic material in there. Because you need to know that like the fact that the Bottarga von Cabras is so prestigious, like it's because the low salinity of the pond, because like the pond actually used to communicate with the sea only through a set of very thin, fingery channels. But that was an issue for the urban fabric. It was an issue for the urban fabric because when it was raining, like the neighborhoods of the city that basically bases its economy only on the production of Bottarga were flooded. So during the 70s, they had to open that channel that you see there in the bottom, like called Canale Scolmatore, that somehow completely fixed the flooding issues, but actually prevented like the mullets to really reproduce themselves as they used to be. And like it's not a problem for the ecosystem of the pond because like it transforms itself. But it's interesting that the city who's basing its economy entirely on a precise supply chain in order to sort out an issue of the urban fabric, an anthropic issue, like somehow ends up damaging the economy that they're basing themselves on. So like, that's why, I mean, we really wanted, like when we needed like to produce this piece, I'm gonna wrap it up very soon, like we said, look, let's work with salt. And so let's somehow cook an art piece. So let's understand how like an art piece could be cooked. We involved a high school, what we call in Italian Istituto Alberghiero, that trains like chefs and people working like in hospitality. And we were producing together like this piece. The reason why, I mean, just like a few words, why an auction? Because like, again, like okay, we want to work with salt, but like, what do we do? The funny thing is that when we were doing like research, like for the first time, like this small town that like had to start importing, let's say, Bottarga from elsewhere, because like, again, like the demand was so incessant and like the city started identifying itself only on the production of Bottarga so that they weren't able to reinvent themselves economically. So like they started importing Bottarga from like Mauritania, from the Brazil, from Senegal, somehow like with very obvious like sustainable issues. And like in 2022, for the first time, they actually did an auction. Sorry, yeah, you see it in here. They did an auction, like similarly to what happens in Italy, for example, for the truffles in Alba or for the tuna in Carloforte, somehow saying, look, if you want to stop importing, like we need to start selling like the local produces like at high prices. Like, again, like trying to find a solution within the realm of food production. While what we propose, like what if we take an abandoned church and we stage a surreal auction, alternative auction that is trying to provide, let's say, resources for alternative like forms of economy. And so like we built pieces, we did like the short film that you saw a bit, and then we transported the whole stage set into the Venice Biennale. What you see in there within the pavilion, it's exactly the footprint of the church itself with like its scenography. And we built a it's exactly like the 7 meters by 4 meters. And we built then a digital platform, like together with an NGO that protects the coastal areas in Sardinia, like like giving all the solcons in exchange of a donation to this NGO. So it was like really an alternative like fundraising campaign, and again, like taking advantage of the Biennale framework in order to provide resources that like would help to protect the coastal areas in there and would help to promote alternative forms of economy. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm also here speaking not only on my behalf, but also like on behalf of forensic architecture and the team that we work in this case in 2016. Actually was probably like the biggest project that forensic architecture took in Latin America. And I think I found it really relevant for the brief of the roundtable. Because actually it was not only an investigation, but actually was the design of a cartographic tool. So this presentation will focus on the enforced disappearing of the Ayotzinapa students in Mexico and the development of an interactive platforms that aim to explore and investigate these incidents through the different narratives. The platform also questioned the so-called historical truth of the Mexican states through spatial and temporal dimensions. So forensic architecture was commissioned in 2016 by the Miguel Agustin Pro Juarez Human Rights Center, on behalf of the families and the Argentinian forensic anthropology team, to investigate the violent acts that took place in the city of Iguala in Mexico on the night of the 26th and 27th of September of 2014. Around 80 students, aspiring rural teachers, were on their way to commemorate March of a historical student massacre in Mexico City. As part of their journey, they hoped to take more buses in Iguala to reach their final destination. However, they were brutally attacked, leaving 6 dead, 40 injured, and the disappearance of 43 students who were last seen with local police loading them into their patrol cars. The historical truth claims that the students were arrested by local police and the orders were done by the mayor of Iguala, and they were handed over to the members of organized crime, who allegedly murdered them and burned them in a nearby landfill. However, this official version has been challenged by investigations, civil society groups, and the relative. And there were many inconsistencies as well in the relationship of time, actions, places, and where exactly attacks took place, according to the witness testimonies. And unlike other cases in forensic architecture, actually the visual evidence of this case was very limited. So you're seeing we have probably 5 images in total to work with. And the main evidence was the reports of the interdisciplinary group of the independent experts, together with testimonies, legal files, and telephone records. So as we were reading through other reports, we could identify spaces, peoples, times that were repeated in different texts and in different documents, connections that were quite difficult to make in a text format. But it was really necessary to begin to understand the spatiality and the temporality of the data, especially because there was a lack of clarity among the public about what happened, exactly because of the lack of images. So we converted this information into thousands of records stored in a database using the technique called data mining, which involves extracting, classifying, labeling, and analyzing large amount of information. We identify fragments of text that later becomes event. Then we identify in each sentence like the time, location, subject, actions, objects mentioned like cars, weapons, and then we, of course, include it in the database. A code was developed to place in space and time the database event. Each event is mapped both geographically and temporarily. In the timeline below, you can also see each event in their time scale, no? If it belongs to a minute or a date or a month. So events have always a description of and they are color coded based on the sources of testimonies, such as red for victims, blue for police, green for military, among others. In total, we find 5,000 individual events through the whole process. And the idea of the platform as well is that it was possible as well for the users to keep adding information, no? We were just revising a specific amount of archive that these institutions have, but of course, the whole case was extremely big. So the platform it turns in a mapping tool where you can visualize how the events unfold at different scales. From the urban scales, where you can see the areas of the attack in red and the bus routes in black, to the state scale, where you can identify other areas of attacks and the presence of other police from other municipalities. The identification of these, especially those 2, well, there were 3, there is another one a bit further, but these main crime scenes was really key because they differ from the official version, which only recognized 1. So the process of classification was central, since this is what allows certain information to be visible or not. So we had a long list of labels was generated where information can be searched by first-hand testimonies or mentions by others, by groups or individuals, such as victims of police, or by objects, such as a specific bus or a car patrol, and by actions, such as coordination, movement, communication, and medical assistance. probably one of the most relevant categories that emerged during the whole research was the category of violence against evidence, which I will discuss a bit more shortly. So this categorization system enabled the visibility of individual analysis of various narratives, but also like facilitate like cross-reference. For instance, in the military case, it allows us to identify their presence at all the crime scenes, and they were there was a continuous communications with the main battalion, and they would also use the C4, which is a communication system designed to monitor and attend citizens. However, no help was given at all during the whole night. The options to view also like the testimonies mentioned by others, it was a really good tool because it helped us to understand what was omitted by their testimonies, like in this case by the military, what they were not saying and how other people actually record their actions. So the combination as well, when we start like mixing like the different tasks, coordination, reports, kind of like start revealing the level of organization between the state agents during the night at different times. Something that was denied by the official version, which only states that one type of police intervened and that the attack was like, for the student, was a responsibility only of the organized crime. The overlay as well of the routes of different vehicles. So this is a map of all the different routes based on their testimonies, confirms that actually various agents follow the students' buses closely and were present at all the crime scenes. The event of mapping revealed the true scale of the attack. Initially seen as a single assault, it actually involved attacks of the other civilians' buses, including the Avispones football team outside Iguala, and different roadblocks by security agents that were done nearby the towns. So the cartography analysis of the event was also combined by other techniques, such as the analysis of the crime scenes at a smaller scale, where we feel that the cartography framing actually encounters a limitation. And we found that in the 3D reconstruction, there is a more effective tool to materialize the experience at a human scale. The 3D models and diagrams help us to understand the choreography between the subjects and objects in each scene, how when they enter minute by minute, and this analysis kind of improve as well the accuracy of the data points that we were locating in our database. After the analysis, we create these interactive models that gave kind of another materiality to these data points, explaining one of a more granular scale of the phases of the attack, complementing as well the cartographic scale. And at the same time, these analyses were accompanied by a series of videos questioning the effects of violence against people and the evidence. Since we realized that the violence against people was the first one that happened, but the violence against the evidence was the one who have prolonged and forced disappearing through false narrative, the destructions of evidence, and the omission of testimonies. For instance, I'm going to play here. Is it playing? Yes, now it's playing. So one instance of violence against evidence is the disappearance of the security videos from the Palace of Justice, which is the one that we're seeing right now, where one of the attacks actually occurred. The judiciary in the state of Guerrero justified that destroying these videos, citing technical issues and deeming them unimportant. However, by simulating the cameras based on their specifications, we determined that they could actually have captured the attackers and the direction in which they were taken. Yes. So another example is the omission of testimonies. such as the military agent who photographed one of the attack buses, omitting the presence of another bus behind him. However, the photo, when we place the photo in the model, it'll help us to reveal his position, and that he actually will be able to see the bus behind him, which actually was the only bus that was not attacked and left while escorted by patrols, and have been disappeared since now. So these inconsistencies continue to cast doubt on the accuracy of the historical truth. The mural, which you are seeing right now, acting as another research tool, visually represent the narratives and testimonies we have encountered. Each line corresponds to a testimony depicting the position of both victims and perpetrators through the night. Vertically, it shows all the locations where the different actors were, and horizontally it represents the time. Through its own language of colors, line thickness, and graphic conventions, the mural conveys information about the key actors, quantity of people, communications, and the status of testimonies, such as those for example, the ones on the upper part that are in purple are represented as blurry purple lines. They were testimonies that were taken under torture, and of course, they are really far away from where actually the other testimonies are. So they are, when we were doing this mapping of testimonies, we find that there were more correlation between all of them than actually the official narrative. So what actually this map especially highlight is this discrepancy, between the history truth represented in black and the truth that emerged from various narratives that align among themselves, represented in different colors. Then, as many of the forensic architecture investigations, these are always presented in a forum, in a cultural forum, where the idea is to present and share this information with the public and discuss. So there were also a lot of workshops, and we did a lot of tutorials to kind of explain how to use the platform as well, and how to keep conducting investigations, and also discussing these discrepancies of the official narrative that the people already knew that they were happening, and they were going and to these several marches to ask for justice, and this kind of help them and provide them evidence to keep the investigation open. And also to keep, of course, asking the role of the Mexican state in this crime. Thank you.
So I'm sort of looking at women's running bodies in my PhD, and I'm using you as a test bed for what might come next in my PhD. But when I discuss women in this presentation, it's not to exclude, but to include and recognise as intersectional experience and the ableism of running. Feminism has made space for women's runners and space users. As women's liberation movements grew through the 20th century, many women have released themselves from gender normative conditions. Some of this has been through running, but the inequity of this experience is still occurring, reoccurring and bothering bodies. Many do not realise the challenges faced for women in public space, even today. I've lost my place, sorry. Feminist spatial practices have utilised the tools of storytelling, community building, educating and testing to defy the status quo. My mapping highlights the issues of women's access to public space. The mappings aim to expose the inequalities which remain, and even how the most able of bodies can be marginalised and their access constrained, revealing an unequal city. I then looked at how mapping can be activated and become live in our architectural practice in our community, drawing maps from beyond the page. So I don't know if anyone knows the mapping platform Strava, but I guess in a basic sense, Strava originates from the word strive in Swedish, and it produces maps such as this. So I guess my job is done. I don't need to do this PhD. But platforms such as Strava flattens bodies' experience of space. I was saying at lunch, your line would be the same as my line if we ran together. removes the layers and political fabrics that bodies have to traverse through to move through cities freely. Yet 71% of women of all ages in the UK have experienced sexual harassment in public space. Personally, the deaths of Sarah Everard, Sabina Nessa, and Aisling Murphy, who actually was murdered during a run, have left women questioning how much space they can really take up. My method is running. I use myself as a device to explore my experiences as a woman runner. Originally, the mapping was a piece of autoethnography, which is a critical starting point to understand the potential of feminist mapping. As Maxi once stated, I am recording from where I am at. Autoethnography was defined by Ellison Bochner as an autobiographical genre of writing and research that displays multiple layers of consciousness, connecting the personal to the cultural. Autoethnography has offered me an architectural research method to capture my running and taking up of space. But how do we capture emotion, feeling, thinking, experience? My notes, or perhaps footnotes on a map, capture a woman's run. The reader or viewer is situated to be able to see some of the constraints faced and overcome. Ellis discusses how the autoethnographic method allows us to pay attention to physical feelings, thoughts, and emotions, allowing us to understand a way of life. To understand a way of life in my work, I undertake a rigorous process. I run, I listen to the voices around me while I run, I observe group mentalities, I observe lone runs, I write about the run, I map the run, and then I draw upon my experience of feminist text to create maps which construct a wider argument about bodies in space. So here are just a few of them. Here's a run to get home. I'm actually wondering if these are in the right order, but never mind. A run from studio, the studio where I work, to a site. A run to learn a place. And finally, a run for heartbroken people. Academia would traditionally reject this approach and would encourage researchers to be removed from the field. However, embedding myself in my research has been a tool that I have consistently used. It could cause bias, but Sultana argues that over-concern has paralysed some scholars into avoiding fieldwork. I believe that by forging forward and retaining my embedded nature, I've been able to reveal more in this study. Through these maps, I've been able to build a clearer picture of what it is to be a woman running in London. For example, this drawing captures moments of tension, drawing upon my personal experience. I map where friends live, where I feel safe, where I feel isolated, where I'm scared, where I've heard stories, and where I have stories. Did that change? Yeah. These maps capture how a body is experienced in public space and discusses flaneuring, visibility, gaze, safety, accepted bodies, comfortable and accessible space, and finally, who is welcome. As the drawings developed, they interweave and layer text. In this case, matrix, making space, carefully pasted onto the page. I have associated their words with notes of mine. The words speak of how women have been taught to use space in a certain way. This drawing captures a route I most often take around East London. In this case, 3 girls met for a run around a track, but it was shut due to ice, so we took to the streets, or in this case, the canal, asking each other if it's too dark. We shouldn't be here. I paste the words of Bell Hooks nearby. Do you believe that space can give life or take it away? That space has power? Hooks once spoke that women have no space, that they must be endlessly moving or enclosed. So we're moving. We start chatting. Fran has started a new job. She's sleeping with her co-worker. Federici is entwined. Labelling all this production of knowledge as gossip is part of the degradation of women. These moments shared on a run are moments where women create community space for each other to take up space. We avoid the park, normally my favourite, and a safe space, but not in the dark. We turn, past the men in the pub, down the main road, chatting away, gathering ourselves and each other, weaving together as we weave through the city. This final drawing captures my integration with other women in space, the sharing of feminist spatial practice and the act of mapping. But how do we activate a map? How do we remake the heteronormative experience of cities, space predominantly built and dominated by men? So I took the maps and activated them with women's bodies in a series called Taking Space. The work derives from consciousness-raising activism the sharing of experiences to raise awareness and generate change. The work encourages and alerts others to activate their bodies in space, to recognize marginalization, and to design, live, and move with more cognizance. T-shirts were made, allowing the body to become an instrument to draw in space. The activation acted to bring women's bodies into spaces where they weren't expected to be, in this case, a gallery, and to run to and from the gallery, passing through spaces which felt threatening but were also liberating. The act takes the mapping from the page, activating it. I ran wearing cameras, capturing anecdotes from fellow runners, collecting new knowledge from voices usually unheard and then returning it to the map. The invisible experience of women is rendered visible through the material generated from this collective act. The mapping had now conjured images, as you're seeing, of women taking up space and drawing attention to the issues for women in space. There was an outcry for more. Frustration in women has been mounting. So this is the bit I'm going to test on you that I've not presented before, so bear with. Enter the catty calls. I wanted the empowerment that I'd found in taking space to take their women's voices, and especially their moments of silencing when they feel the most vulnerable, and allow them to take mapping into their own hands. This is my sister's cat, Mabel. She has been leading this. I am currently constantly crowdsourcing cat calls from women runners through an online form. A seemingly basic act, taking poor Mabel as a cute anecdote to catch attention and fight the algorithm on social media, the cat calls give opportunity for mapping to become political, additive, and driven by women outside of just my experience, but also our academic fields, circles, and outside of my control. The maps highlight the injustices found for women in space. Some men find these truly shocking, as they should. A constant generative map, remaking the idea that anyone can move through space and building solidarity through feminist disruptive practice.
Thank you all so much. This was terrific. And I really enjoy the diversity of your project and your approach, but I also think you have some common grounds in a way. So I would like to initiate the discussion with some of the common grounds I saw. Perhaps, since we are in an academic institution, one of my first questions would be how your practical work, how your practice inform your teaching or your way of doing research. Because most of you are doing your PhDs, and then Lorenzo and Sabrina, you are teaching, but also at the same time you have the practice. So how, for example, do you theorize your work? How does this inform your practice and vice versa?
Well, so I work at AECOM, which is a large engineering firm. We actually built a lot of the highways that I'm talking about in the first place. We built them in the 50s and 60s. The company had a different name, Ashland Oil Company. They also built highways. So the answer is to a large extent. My PhD work, to a large extent informs my professional work, again, because I mentioned at the top that that was the question, right?
Yeah, how your academic work and what you're learning or doing through your PhD informs your practical work.
Yeah.
Both at segregation by design and at AECOM, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Well, as part of my PhD, I'm also looking at potential solutions, not to these divisions, which is a huge. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm exactly answering your question, but which is a huge undertaking because we haven't really. Boston removed its highway right through it buried it. It didn't remove it. It buried it. It actually made it wider. It made it wider. But long story short, there's not many good examples of restorative justice-focused infrastructure projects. We're only just now getting a handle on the scale of the problem in the first place that happened in the 50s and 60s and is continuing to happen today. They're still building these highways through predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods to this day. You know, it's not history. And they're widening these highways, blah, blah, blah. But that's all to say that for my PhD, I'm trying to look at some solutions. Design is necessary but not sufficient to fix the problems I'm talking about. You know, these are physical barriers that they built, but that's not going to solve like the economic problems. And you know, there's also the risk of gentrification if you fix the problem of these highways in the Bronx, for instance. You know, we're talking about building, the highway is below grade, so it's like, you know, in a trench. So we're talking about building caps over it, but then that might potentially, you know, gentrify the whole corridor and then displace the people that we're trying to help in the first place. So how do you deal with that? You know, through the PhD, I'm able to look at problems like that academically. You know, whereas at work, that's not necessarily the most profitable thing for work, but not that that's all that's important. You know, I'm not speaking on behalf of AECOM here. It's great to work there. It's a fantastic place.
That's a really nice disclaimer.
Exactly. You know, but they are, you know, they do view this a little bit as like a mea culpa because they built these highways in the first place. But you know, the work I'm doing with the PhD is they're very receptive to it, and the communities are very receptive to it because again, they know what happened. You know, they live it. But this is the first time that there's money to fix it. You know, people have talked about fixing it, but now there's some money. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah. Well, I guess I have learned, maybe it's been kind of like the opposite. I have learned from my work in forensic architecture, and now it's like, now I'm questioning it again back now that I'm doing the PhD. Well, first, because I feel like forensic architecture has these like really unique, that they are working with research, but at the same time, you are constantly working, you're approached by the people. You know, like you are not just like deciding to take a case study and then approaching the people. Is the opposite, no? Like exactly. So it was like a commissioning always comes from the victims or comes from their family. So I feel like that in relation to when we like start like a PhD project is a big difference, no? Because then it's different when you are from the first moment on their side, and then when you are actually kind of like studying a specific situation. So I think that's probably one of the things that I've been finding quite challenging, at least in my PhD. But at the same time, I guess one thing that has been, I mean, since I started working with FA in 2015, I've been working mainly on Latin American projects. And also like, interestingly, being always like really, for a reason, they have been lacking of like visual evidence, which have somehow kind of like put me in the role of like dealing a lot with documents. And I feel like that helped me a lot to kind of like start questioning something that we were speaking before about the archives, how to like gather materials and how actually space and time could be like that glue of all the different sources that you encounter where you're doing a research. No, like I feel like a space like as a way to narrate something, you know, like I think is really something that I can bring back to my PhD, and how also like how to approach different type of evidence, you know, like the fact that all the cases are built around the type of evidence. Like if we just have sound, then okay, the whole investigation is going to be around sound. So I think this is quite interesting because then again, like these are things that you kind of like reflect back on your own work. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess as far as how it intersects with practice, to me, running is a practice. Taking space is a practice. Working at MUF is very clearly a practice. And a lot of the comments that I get are often, oh, so you're looking at like street lighting and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, no, because it's not so much of this sort of literal informing, but MUF have taught me how to approach engagement and activation of space in a way that I didn't know before I worked there. And the running has sort of informed me of different people's experiences of spaces that I don't get from community engagement, because I'm meeting different types of people all the time. So they always sort of engage and intersect with each other, but at the same time sort of bother each other. And I think that's how we should see it, instead of necessarily informing each other practice and PhDs or academia and practice, whichever way you want to look at it. But they kind of need to bother each other a bit and not find answers necessarily, but keep that conversation going. And that's sort of what I try to do between my personal practice of running, my collective practice of taking space, and my collective architecture practice of math. And I think I always end up sort of talking about having a personal practice. And I think that's often what PhDs create space for. But it can be something such as running or netball or football or whatever it is that makes you engage in the architectural world. You got one there. So.
Me and Sabrina, we really define, well, I don't know if, but we define ourselves as mainly designers, practitioners. Like, as you might have noticed, like, our work sometimes is not extremely like precise or rigorous, but like mainly based on intuitions, inventions, still, at least we believe, deeply rooted in sensible observations of the surroundings. Nonetheless, I mean, we basically started teaching and practicing together from the beginning, right after graduation. Like, I don't know, like, we graduated in here on a very peculiar day that seemed to stress quite a lot the idea of either or, because we graduated in that square on the 24th June 2016, the day of Brexit. So I guess like that it was kind of a reaction, like this willingness of like embracing both. We wanted to do everything. We wanted to, so we started teaching, working together, like so somehow our practice and our practice of teaching were growing like simultaneously. And I feel that's something which is quite peculiar and quite amazing of places like the AA, like the Royal College of Arts, or like other universities where we had the pleasure to teach, like in Thailand, in Vienna, is that like you really have like small design studios that can be somehow really designed together with the students. So we really think at them as like somehow projects that we collaboratively put in place, like with the students that we have every year. Like in our brief about conviviality, like we start by saying that conviviality is like simultaneously the subject of study, the methodological approach, and the expected outcome. So in that sense, like we really think that like somehow things are quite blurred. I mean, we are aware that we might, let's say, we should try perhaps to put some order in that. Like I forgot to mention it, but I just started a PhD in Naples about architecture pedagogy, because I feel that after, I don't know, like 8 years, 8 years of teaching and practicing, maybe it's time to start putting some order like in our thoughts and methodology. But like, again, one of our favorite formula in that sense, that I think it was pronounced right in this room like a few decades ago by Bernard Schumi, is that like the knowledge of form is a form of knowledge. So in that sense, like we really see the two things like mostly overlapped.
Is this working? Okay. Yeah, this was great. I was somehow expecting to hear something more, you know, for some reason I was expecting you to have a very similar answer, but you had very different answers. And in a way, on my perspective, being in academia helped me a lot learn how to do non-extractive practical work, and have and carry some ethical frameworks of working with communities, especially when I'm not part of them. So my next question, last, because I want to open it up to the audience, is you're working in several places, and there are cases where you don't know the people, so you have to go on site, spend some time there, learn how to live with the communities, or sometimes just work with the archives of other communities. So I was wondering if there was any instance where you had critical voices from these communities, or you received pushback in a way in your work, and this informed the way you're doing your research, your methods, and help you or lead you to change your methods and the way you're conducting your research, both on the site and in general. If there was, let's say, if there were people within these communities that pushed you back, or didn't accept you as outsiders, perhaps, and this led you to change the way you're doing your work in these places and your methods. That's the question.
I mean, that's the sort of positive of doing. Is this on? Yeah. There we go. The positive of doing something from an autoethnographical lens or approach is I was going to do my PhD about women in architecture, but I was just running communities all the time, and writing from the inside has its politics. A lot of the people I run with look and run like I run, and so I've had to seek out other spaces within where I'm sort of my study, but it means you can't be pushed back when you're in, and if you're trying to bring other people into your study, i.e. I've been running with sort of Muslim run groups, you're still in their club. Do you know what I mean? So I think if there's any way to truly embed yourself, I don't know, because if you start to embed yourself after you've started the research, potentially that's uncomfortable. But if you're taking it from something that's already your life, you can't. But at the same time, you're then turning your colleagues into subjects, which has a different politics to it.
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. I've talked a lot about social media, but that's where a lot of the project lives. But I used to be, when I first started the project, as I said, I'm going sort of city by city, covering all the cities that got money for these two projects, or from two bills. Doesn't matter, 56 Highway Bill and 49 Housing Act. I used to, when I first started out, be more gung-ho about gung-ho. That's a weird. Sorry. About proposing solutions. I used to be more willing about proposing what I thought were solutions. Right. So again, these communities remain divided by these highways. The highways have only gotten bigger and more congested. And as an architect, as a designer, now I'm doing urban planning, but as a designer, our first instinct is we see a problem, we want to fix it. But that's like not my place. I mean, it's my place to shepherd. These redesigns should not come from one individual architecture expert, blah, 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 as they did in the past. That's how we got into this position in the first place, right? It needs to start with the community. I'm not saying they need to come up with the plans because they're not all architects. But the first step is consulting them, and then our job should be, as designers, should be channeling that into a design.
Or give them the tools.
Or give them the tools, right.
Yeah, in a way, like use your skills. I think somebody mentioned that in one of the previous tables. Like, as designers, we can create the tools for the communities to represent themselves. We don't have to do it for them. So it's
Precisely.
How do you? I always think this when you're trying to connect with a community that you're not in, and then you represent a designer and knowledge, and in your case a white man.
Yeah.
How do you remove your kind of representation? You can't, to so many extents, but it's like if you say, oh, this could be a good idea,
Yeah.
naturally people will agree with you.
Oh, given my privilege.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So then how do you truly ensure your presence isn't driving? Not even if you said anything. I don't know.
No, that's a great
I always
question.
think this.
I mean, like I said, I'm much more, and I know this is like a cop-out, or I don't mean to.
Because I think all architects are like this, right? We're doing like anything and we're trying to engage with people, and then we say like, oh, what about a tree? And they go, oh yeah, tree's a good idea.
Yeah.
But it's because you said it.
It's just because you said it, right? That's a great question. You know,
You don't have to answer it.
No,
I'm
and I
more
don't
just
really-
like thinking.
Well, again, it's not that I don't want to talk about solutions at all.
Yeah.
It's just that now when I do, I'm much more careful about it, and do it not necessarily on social media. Although it's also not good to just do the bad stuff. But there's a lot of uplifting parts to the story too, regardless.
Maybe those are the bits.
Say that again?
The uplifting bits. Maybe it's like that thing of drawing out people's stories. Actually, I'm just thinking.
Well, and there's scenarios in which, or there's plenty of, well, not plenty.
Because you were
There's-
like pulling like different, this is someone's house and this is who they were, and it's that kind of.
Yeah. Well, I spoke to their families to get
Yeah.
those photos. Sorry, I've totally lost the thread now. Wait, how do I make sure that I'm not?
Yeah, us as designers, not you in particular, are driving a narrative of a design or an analysis or.
Well, you know, in the one that I'm working on now,
Yeah.
because again, in my project, in my PhD, I don't typically discuss solutions too much, but
Yeah.
at work I have to. At work we do, and the big one we're working on now is the Cross Bronx Expressway, which is I think I've mentioned this, but it's in a trench. Yeah, I did mention this. It's in a trench, and we're trying to build parks over the top, and as part of that, we're holding. I mean, it's this. We're just doing this on behalf of our client, who's New York City
Yeah.
or New York State. But we held a series of like 25 public outreach meetings. And at each of those, we don't really lead it. We organize it, but we have community groups sort of take the
Lead on it.
yeah, exactly. Especially this one, we're Loving the Bronx. They've been fantastic. But we let them sort of do it. But I mean, that doesn't really answer the question because, yeah, sometimes when we step in, it's like, yeah, that we agree. But it's just something.
You don't have to answer.
No. It's just it's something to be mindful about. But I think the closest I can get to answering is for the solution or for community reasons, you know, when we're looking at solutions, we let the existing community organizations sort of take the front, or, you know, be the public face of it. But that's not to say but we shouldn't I don't want to hide, you know, who I am because it's also informing the work to some extent. So I do want people to know, like, I'm a white dude from Florida who's doing this project and with my biases. But at the same time, we're the ones who did it in the first place. So I think to some extent we have a responsibility to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a very
I always
interesting
go
conversation. We can continue having this conversation later, but I want to give Lorenzo and Nadia the opportunity to respond, and then perhaps you can ask questions to one another, and ideally open it up to the audience because we have like less than 5 minutes. Yeah.
Well, I can just say that, especially for this project, I think one of the things that we do when we start an investigation is, like, as I was mentioning, we're always like, you know, they come to us, no, like, so we ask them what is going to be useful for them, you know, apart from the investigation, but actually in this case, they really needed, like, the organizations, Anthropro really needed a tool to keep the investigation open. But at the same time, we have discussion with the families, also like what is going to be useful for them, like to take evidence into court or to the public forum. So one of the things that they said that they were not images or anything around this. So we kind of like, that's why the visualization of the whole event was super important. But also just to mention that when the way that we work is like every time there is a project, there is people from the place. So Mexican people, we go there several times, we meet them regularly, and the income, the outputs of the projects do change a lot. For example, when we speak about the 3D and how like there is a limitation of the cartography on like actually deploying experience. Like this came as well from many talks with the families, because as well this is people that they don't know first how to read, and you're giving like a lot of like legal papers, so that itself is really violent. So I guess like to see maps and 3Ds, and actually when they see there are thousands of drawings where the children were located exactly in the position in which seat and where was the last time or like position when there's that was super important. So we there is always like this conversation about what they need and also like how they want to also seem represented, no? Like, of course, and we ask them if the name want to be like display. This is something that happened with many projects. And sometimes it's true, like it changed a lot. I mean, not in this project, but in other projects in Colombia, for example, we get really anxious when, for example, we have a 3D model of a plantain banana and doesn't look like the campesino wants it, because you feel like a high responsibility that, of course, you want this to look exactly how they want it, because this is like a part of evidence that sometimes hopefully is going to occur. So I think it's like a really, conversation that goes through whole investigation. Exactly, yeah.
I'd say that like it happened to us like all the time to be pushed back and like then to be pushed forward because we were pushed back. I think like that in framing the question, you use the word that like we all often use. I did it like 5 minutes ago, but that it might be quite dangerous, which is method. Like the more we do things, both like in practice and in academia, the more I believe, well, maybe we believe, we often discuss it, that we don't have a method. Like we have an approach that manifests itself like through a set of fears, wishes, obsessions, fascinations, and then we have a set of tools. We have a set of very specific tools that we bring on the table whenever we work with someone. And but then it really ends there. Well, it starts there. Like it's more like then the method can be tailored specifically like for each project, like depending who you deal with. And it is not only like the community, like somehow like doing a lot of projects that are in between things. And sometimes I feel we do things in between because maybe we are scared to commit to something, because we are scared to somehow become someone that needs to provide solutions, which are needed, but like we are scared from that. So, but like working in between things, you start like, you deal with the multiplicity of actors, like communities, but like, I don't know, like sellers, fishermen, but like curators and like technicians. And then you realize that like the authorship of your project really lies within the relational dynamics that like you build. And so like, and relational dynamics can be quite constrained by strong methods. While like if you're clear in terms of like which is the set of tools, and like you have tools, communities have tools, technicians have tools, curators have tools, and like we bring all together tools on that table. I'm not against that, the idea of method, but I'm just saying like we often try to unpack it a bit. Because and then like that's also like, in my opinion, the beauty and the danger of academia. Because like academia, like academic projects, like student projects, like they allow you to work ethically, to build like the framework that you want for yourself. They allow you to have a lot of time, which is usually what you lack when it comes to work with communities. And it's really needed to gain like trust, like to really do things as they should be. But then you're the mastermind of everything. And like you don't confront yourself with the layers of the reality and with those relational mechanisms that ultimately end up determining the authorship. So like that's, and of course, like what I'm saying, like, I think like there's more and more the need of like, which, I mean, it was amazing like to see it like in different forms in all the projects. I don't want to speak about myself, but like this part of the table, like in all the projects that we saw in here, like to really do academic projects out there in the world, like somehow facing a lot of contingencies that like, again, end up characterizing and like affecting and determining the method, if we want to call it as such.
Perhaps we have time only for one question, but probably, I mean, this is a test. all of you should actually answer to this question by the audience by using one sentence. Perhaps, That's fine. Just,
Yeah, I prefer
just
that. Let's
test
do
it
that.
out,
And then perhaps
So,
the audience can join us for tea
Yes,
outside of here.
because we need actually to go
Yeah.
for the break in order, for the maintenance team to dismantle the, the room. So probably we can continue the discussion afterwards. So, okay.
Hello. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to ask the question.
All the pressure now.
The question I had was actually very long, but I will short it down for all of the speakers here. The one term or concept that I want to problematize or ask you about is that in all of your work, there is this word called community, right? We are referring to that there is a community out there where violence have happened, and how architects or academics or experimental work, like whatever kind of work can be done to reconcile or grapple, not to fix the violence, but to grapple with it, right? Now, my question, and originally the question was for Adam, thank you for your presentation, is that there is, I see, and I put it as a problem, that I see a problem in having a static idea of a community out there, like this is the community around a neighborhood. And the very mechanisms with which you have a racialization of space by marking a red line, saying that this is the community because Jewish people or Black people or people of color live here, that's the community, that's the understanding of the community, and later on makes the groundwork for its erasure. It's the same criteria with which we are approaching the word community today, only in a reverse order, saying that, oh, the flyover was a bad idea, let's build some parks or something else, right? So how do you grapple with the problem that community is, in essence, I would argue, not a static or a fixed idea, but rather a dynamic and moving one? And community is not formed only within one ethnic or one racial identity, but between different racial and different ethnic identities. So, but that question expanded to how do we understand difference within the word community as a whole, if that makes sense.
One sentence. Isn't like James Joyce, what's his book? The famous the Odyssey. Not the Odyssey, but isn't that one sentence? Ulysses. Yeah. Sorry. It's one. So I can do one stream of consciousness. I don't even know how to answer for that. That's a really great question. That's because these communities are constantly changing, especially the nature of the physical nature of a lot of them. This isn't true for someplace like Sugar Hill, which is very stable for 50 years. Oh.
You have one sentence.
And of course, we can still continue the discussion during the break.
Yeah.
If you all can actually give a short, let's say, answer to the question of the staticness of the community, which perhaps it's the thing that you can all grab and anchor your sentences, perhaps. Because I know that right now the question is quite, can bring a lot of discussion.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm still thinking about my potential answer.
Okay, do you want me to go first? Okay. I've got this one, right? You can do it. I'm not ready. I just was taking the heat off you.
It's a really good question. It's
yeah, I think the sort of difference within, I think, doesn't come clear quickly. So as much as I'm lucky that in the study that I've done, it's within a running community I'm already in the work at MUF, and the fact that my running community is quite one type of body, it's really looking for who isn't being heard and making sure they're heard. And that comes from becoming embedded. And I think we keep using this word community, as you say, and I don't think you can, as an architect, take what the client represents. It says, this is the community. Is it? there was a MUF project. This is really quick. There was a MUF project where they were like, this is a community, but actually a load of the teenagers had antisocial behaviour orders and they weren't allowed in places at certain times. And then when we realised that, it changed the whole actually who we needed to speak to because we just weren't seeing them. So don't just use your eyes. You have to kind of get in there and then find out who's missing and create your sort of team on the ground, your community on the ground. That wasn't a sentence, sorry. I gave you loads of time though, guys.
Yeah, right. Well, and again, you know, these aren't monolithic communities. Even within, you know, in a place like Miami, there's big divisions between, even amongst, you know, Afro-Caribbean and Black American, basically people who immigrated from the Caribbean versus people who were brought. I mean, they were both brought as slaves, or they were all brought as slaves, but former British subjects versus people who were brought directly to America. And there's a lot of divisions between them. So yeah, defining the community as a top-down is like not useful, and it also propagates the problem in the first place. And there's also the fact that, you know, what gave rise to a lot of these communities in the first place was segregation, right? That's why they had to physically be in one place. So I don't know. I'm gonna stop. Good question.
I would say that, well, in this case particularly, there was not, it was something about the way that the event happened. It was always like super focused on the number of 43 students, you know, like, so there was like a clear number of victims. And I think actually when we were doing their investigation, we realized that it was way more than that they were more civilians. And I feel like when we're speaking as communities or like the people who approach to us to help them to research something specifically, we are of course like not only speaking about the families of the people who disappeared, but also like we're speaking that Mexico is one of the countries with the highest level of enforced disappearance. We're speaking as well like that these students were going to march to other massacres of students in history. We're speaking about that all the civilians and like they were like completely shocked about this event, and it becomes like a state crime. So I think like these families who of course we were the one who have like first contact also represent many other voices, no? And I guess it goes back to this idea of like the individual versus the collectivity. But I feel like through their cases and through these investigations, you can reach, of course, like a larger community, let's say. Yeah.
I mean, I'll try really to stick it to one sentence, like somehow saying that you're right, that like the idea of like community, if like understood as fixed and not as a contingent, volatile construct that perhaps sometimes we need as designers to operate, as researchers to operate with things, can become very dangerous. And I'll just add one word that I don't remember if we used it or like, but for sure we hinted at it, that can be as dangerous as community, which is identity. And like I recently in a talk, in a similar roundtable, I came across a slogan that I really loved, which is, I would not wish an identity upon anyone. So like upon, superimposed. So it's really like labels are always very dangerous. But like as people that do things, research on things, we need to be aware of this danger, and like we need to really think at them as like, again, precarious, fragile, like constructs that like we need to handle very carefully.
Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you for your presentations.
Thank you, Areti.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's continue the discussion like on the break, and yeah, 30 minutes we will be back when the room, will be rearranged again.